All right, let's dive in. Today we're tackling, well, how to tackle just about anything, at least in terms of arguing for it.
Sounds pretty powerful, huh?
It kind of is. We're talking about Aristotelian rhetoric, folks. You've probably heard the name, the basics, Aristotle, ancient Greece, persuasion.
The OG of winning an argument, some might say.
But it's way more than just that winning part, isn't it? That's what makes this deep dive so interesting, because so much of what Aristotle was talking about, like thousands of years ago, is still how we communicate today.
Absolutely. And maybe even more so now in this age of, 247 information and everyone trying to convince you of something.
Yeah. So before we get to the how-to part, let's paint the picture, set the stage. Ancient Greece, rhetoric wasn't just some academic thing.
Right, it was the thing.
Public trials, political debates, anytime some big decision needed making, there was speechifying involved. Big time.
And you couldn't just, rant and rave. There was an art to it, a structure. And that's where Aristotle comes in.
But here's the thing that I always find kind of cool. We often hear rhetoric now, and it's like, oh, slick talk, empty promises.
Yeah, like a politician trying to fool you.
Exactly. But back then, at least how Aristotle saw it, it was about finding the best way to argue truthfully. Convince people, yeah, but ethically.
Big difference from some of the other rhetoric teachers going around at the time.
Yeah, like there were already these how-to guides, like imagine ancient rhetoric manuals.
Yeah.
But Aristotle's like, nah, that's just manipulation.
He was all about logic, reasoning, finding the best argument because it's the right one, not just the loudest.
So in a way, he was actually going against some of the rhetoric of his own time. Right?
Yeah. He saw it more as this counterpart to something called dialectic, which was about this reasoned debate, really aiming for, capital T truth.
Okay, I'm seeing why this is more than just, tips for giving a good speech. This is a whole philosophy of communication.
It is. And that leads us to the good stuff. What did Aristotle actually give us to put this into practice?
The famous trio, right? Ethos, pathos, logos.
Ding, ding, ding.
And you know what? Even saying those words out loud, they still sound important, don't they?
It's like we just inherently know there's something to that, even now. But for those tuning in who maybe haven't brushed up on their ancient Greek rhetoric lately.
Fair enough. Let's break it down, make sure everyone's on the same page.
All right. Ethos. Now, some folks think this is all about dressing up fancy, looking important.
Oh, please no.
But it's about credibility, right?
That's it. How trustworthy does the speaker seem to their audience? Knowledge, good intentions, that whole vibe.
So it's not just about being a good person, it's about being seen as one. Is that going to be tough sometimes?
Oh, for sure. And imagine back in the day, persuading people was tied to actual power, right? So in those Athenian courts, you really needed that ethos to get folks to follow your lead.
Okay, makes sense. Pathos, though? That's where things can get tricky, right? Emotions, getting people fired up.
Oh, yeah. Pathos can be a double-edged sword. It's not about manipulation, at least not ideally. It's about genuinely connecting with the audience. But how do you do that without, going overboard?
That's the art, isn't it? Recognizing your audience's concerns, using language that resonates, but doing it ethically.
So it's less about tricking people into feeling something and more about guiding their emotions toward the right outcome.
Spot on. Think of a speech that moves you, inspires you. That's pathos done right. Now, we can't leave out our friend logos, can we?
Nope. Got to have logic, or else it all falls apart.
Exactly. Logos is the meat of the argument. Evidence, reasoning, the whole structure that makes it hold up. And, Aristotle was all about systems, wasn't he?
So he didn't just say be logical. He gave a whole framework for how you do it.
Right. And that's where things get really interesting.
So we've got these three pillars, ethos, pathos, logos. But the more we dig into them, the more I'm realizing, there's layers to this stuff.
Oh, yeah. You don't just flip a switch and suddenly, bam, you're persuasive. Aristotle knew that.
Take ethos, for instance. We talked about credibility. But it's not just one thing, right? It's a whole recipe.
Exactly. Aristotle breaks it down further. 3 components to really nail that ethos. Good sense, good moral character, and goodwill. You need all 3.
Okay, hold on. Let's unpack those. Good sense, that's like being smart, having your facts straight.
Yeah, but it's more than just knowing stuff. It's showing you can apply that knowledge. Sound judgment, making smart choices.
So in a way, proving you're not just some bookworm, but someone who can actually, handle things in the real world.
Right. Back in ancient Greece, that was huge, especially for leaders. You had to show people you could make the right call for the right reasons.
Makes sense. But what about good moral character? Is that where, actually being a good person comes in?
It's connected, but it's also about reflecting the values of your audience. What do they consider virtuous? For Athenians, things like justice, courage, generosity, those were
So
biggies.
you can't just be good in a vacuum. Got to align with what your audience already believes in.
Exactly, which is why understanding your audience, really knowing them, is crucial for this whole ethos thing to work.
Starting to feel more like strategy now, less about just being a good dude and hoping for the best.
It's both, though. Sincerity still matters, which is where goodwill comes in. Genuinely having your audience's best interests at heart.
Okay, so you can't just fake it. You got to actually care about these people you're trying to persuade.
That comes across. People can tell if you're just trying to win versus actually wanting what's good for them.
Man, this is intricate. So even beyond the words you're saying, this ethos thing is about projecting the right intention.
Right. And what's fascinating is it still works today. Think about people you trust, leaders you admire. They probably hit those 3 points, whether consciously or not.
All right. We've gone deep on ethos, maybe even deeper than I thought we would. But we've still got pathos and logos to cover.
And trust me, they're just as juicy.
Okay, hit me with pathos then. Emotions, feelings, the heartstring stuff, that's always felt kind of tricky to me.
Oh, it can be. Used poorly, it's manipulation, clean and simple. We see it all the time, sadly.
Shady ads, politicians fear-mongering, all that jazz.
Yep. But Aristotle, he saw it as more than that. He said, using pathos well is about understanding where your audience is already at, emotionally. And then, maybe, gently guiding them somewhere else.
So not just whipping them into a frenzy, but more like meeting them where they are and saying, hey, let's walk this way together.
Yes, it's connection. Think about a story that makes you cry or laugh, that stays with you, that's pathos done right. It can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I'm starting to see how that fits in. If you can get people to feel something, they're way more likely to buy into your whole argument, right?
It's not a guarantee, but it sure helps. All right, we've talked emotions, credibility. Where's the logic in all this? Bring on the logos. Logos is like the bedrock, the facts, the structure, the solid ground your argument stands on. And remember, Aristotle loved systems.
So when it came to logic, he didn't just say, like, think good thoughts, right? There's got to be more to it.
Oh, there is. We touched on it earlier, but it's worth revisiting. 2 main ways to really build that strong logos. Examples, and those tricky enthymemes.
I'm still a bit iffy on enthymemes, honestly. But examples, those I get, like this worked for them, so it can work for you too, kind of thing.
Exactly. Grounding your argument in something concrete makes it real, makes it relatable.
Okay, so that's one tool in the logos toolbox. But enthymemes, remind me, those are like arguments with a hidden piece.
Right. You're relying on the audience to already have a certain belief, and then you build your argument on top of that without saying it directly.
We talked about that politician example. They're politicians, so they must be shady. It assumes everyone already thinks politicians are shady.
Exactly. Powerful stuff, but yeah, can be sneaky too, which is why understanding them is so important for analyzing other people's argument.
So knowing about enthymemes is almost like you can spot the logical tricks people are trying to pull.
It gives you a sharper eye, for sure. You start seeing the underlying structure of arguments, not just the words themselves.
All right, so we've got these examples and enthymemes to work with for building strong logos, but there's one more piece of the puzzle we haven't touched yet, right?
Yes, the topoi. This is where it all comes together.
Okay, lay on me. What are topoi? And how do they fit into all this persuasion business?
Think of them like common lines of argument, strategies that work in lots of situations. Aristotle's giving us a toolkit here.
So not just random tactics, but almost like mental models for how to argue effectively.
Exactly. And he identified a bunch of them, each with its own logic. For example, there's the appeal to consequences. You're basically saying, hey, if we do this, this will happen. So let's choose wisely.
Makes sense. Like, if we don't fund this program, then this bad thing will happen to these people.
Yeah.
You're motivating action based on outcomes.
Exactly. Then there's comparison, which we see everywhere, comparing your product, your idea, whatever, to something else to show why it's better.
Oh, yeah, like those. Our brand is 50% more effective than the leading competitor ads.
Classic comparison. But you can use it for way more than just selling stuff, comparing ideas, policies, anything really.
So Aristotle's basically saying, hey, humans are natural comparers, so use that to your advantage when you're arguing. What other topoi tricks did he have up his sleeve?
Well, there's definition. Sounds basic, but it's crucial. Making sure everyone agrees on what a word or concept means before you start arguing about it.
Oh, that's smart. Especially for tricky topics where people might have different interpretations. Sets the ground rules, avoids confusion.
Exactly. And there are a bunch more topoi, but what's cool is once you start understanding them, you see them everywhere.
It's like you're suddenly speaking this secret language of persuasion.
It can feel that way, and the more you practice with these topoi, the more you can use them consciously in your own arguments.
Man, this has been eye-opening. We've covered a lot of ground, from the history of rhetoric to these really specific tactics. But one thing I keep wondering, Aristotle was all about public speaking. What about writing?
A very good question, and one we'll definitely tackle. But first, a quick break. We'll be right back to finish our deep dive into Aristotelian rhetoric.
Okay, back at it. We've been deep diving into this whole world of Aristotelian rhetoric, all this ethos, pathos, logos stuff.
And don't forget those handy topoi. Quite a toolkit we've uncovered, huh?
But I keep coming back to this one thought. Aristotle, he was all about speeches, right?
Yeah.
Standing up there, booming voice, convincing the crowd.
Very much a product of his time.
But what about the rest of us? We're writing emails, reports, articles, not exactly giving grand orations every day.
Right. The world has changed a bit since ancient Greece. But here's the thing. Even though Aristotle focused on spoken rhetoric, those core principles, they still apply to writing big time.
Okay. But how? Like take ethos, for example. When you're writing, you don't have that presence, that voice, those little cues that build credibility.
You're right, it's different. But it becomes even more important to get that ethos across in your words themselves.
So instead of a booming voice, you need what, like booming sentences? How do you do that on the page?
Think about good writing. The basics, clear language, being concise, citing your sources, showing you've done the research.
Yeah, like, look, reader, I'm not just making this up. I know what I'm talking about.
Exactly. Addressing opposing viewpoints fairly, that shows good character too. You're being thoughtful, not just trying to steamroll people.
So it's almost like showing your work in a math problem, but for your ideas. Got to back it up.
Great analogy. And remember that good moral character bit. That's still huge in writing. Align with your audience's values. Use language that resonates with them.
Man, even writing a work email, I got to be thinking about all this. That seems kind of intense.
Maybe, but it makes a difference. When all you have are the words, how you use them matters even more.
Okay, that's making sense. But pathos, emotions in writing, can you really do that the same way as a speech?
You can. Think about a book that made you cry or a news article that sparked outrage. Words have power.
Right, but it's not just about using like super dramatic language all the time, is it?
It's about the right words at the right time. Vivid imagery, metaphors, telling stories. These things can grab your reader emotionally.
So even in writing, it's about meeting your audience where they are emotionally and taking them on a journey.
Nicely put. And when it works, it's powerful. Okay, ethos, pathos. But what about logic? Seems like logos would be even more crucial in writing, right?
Yeah, you can't charm your way out of a bad argument when it's just there on the page, black and white.
You need solid reasoning, good structure, evidence that backs up your claims. Logos is the backbone of any good writing.
And this is where those examples and endymemes we talked about come in. Right, give me the rundown.
Examples are your bread and butter. Illustrate your point, make it concrete, like, here's a case study that proves my point. Boom, instant credibility.
Makes it real relatable. Okay, that's one tool. What about enthymemes? Those still kind of trip me up.
Remember, they rely on shared beliefs. You're saying, because of this, then that must be true, but leaving out a piece that your audience is supposed to already believe.
Sneaky, but effective. Like that all politicians are liars.
Exactly. It works because people often fill in the blanks with their own assumptions. So knowing about enthymemes makes you a more critical reader.
Okay, got it. Examples to make things concrete. Enthymemes to tap into what people already believe. Aristotle was laying down some serious argumentation game here.
He was. And what's even cooler is those topoi, those common lines of argument, they work in writing too.
Oh, you're right. Appealing to consequences, comparing things. We see writers using those all the time.
They're everywhere. So basically, everything we've learned about Aristotelian rhetoric, it's not just for ancient Greek speeches. It's a whole communication toolkit.
Man, this has been a journey. From the history to those three pillars to all these specific tactics. My brain is buzzing.
Glad to hear it. The key takeaway is Aristotle wasn't just teaching people how to talk fancy. He was teaching them how to think persuasively.
And that matters now more than ever, right? We're bombarded with messages all day. Everyone's trying to convince us of something.
Exactly. So Understanding these principles, it's like having a superpower. You can see through the noise, make better decisions, and communicate your own ideas more effectively.
Listeners, I hope you're walking away from this deep dive feeling empowered, just like I am. We've unpacked Alliety, but honestly, this is just scratching the surface.
There's a whole world of rhetorical theory out there to explore.
So keep those concepts of ethos, pathos, logos in mind. Start noticing them in everything you read and write. You might be surprised how much more you see now that you know what to look for.
And remember, these are tools. Use them for good, use them wisely.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Until next time, folks, keep those minds sharp and those arguments even sharper.